Okay, you're going to get a less than flattering angle of me today while I walk you through this concept on my computer screen. But it's a concept and a strategy that I've seen blow up on social media, and I've been asked by quite a few people to explain and walk through. It is ultimately touted as either a bulletproof strategy, or I've seen it described as the wealth matrix or the wealth pyramid. There are a lot of terms for this, but ultimately it does have a ton of moving parts that are wrapped up in it. And there are reasons why it's being touted, why people make money when you put this into place. I will start out by saying it's not a farce. This is a strategy that very wealthy people have been using for a very long time. But I would argue that, like most of the finance and investment vehicles that I talk about and that are pushed out there, they're good products that are oversold or pushed. And in a lot of cases, this is just a lot of overkill, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to put in place when it might not be necessary. There's also other reasons this is picked up on things like Instagram and TikTok that have to do with people that are trying to get bad debt or get their hands on business loans or all kinds of things. And I'll kind of explain where that's coming into play with this too. So I'm going to start with the quote that I have heard, and this is a direct quote that I have seen from Instagram. They say, "I don't own anything. My Bulletproof Trust owns my holding company. My holding company owns all of my LLCs, and my LLCs are individual assets that make money on my behalf." Now, again, as I mentioned, this is not a new concept. It's one that's been used by the wealthy and their families for decades. And it involves a holding company, which always sounds glamorous, and you often hear of it being attached to these offshore bank accounts and wealthy holding companies in the Bahamas. And I'm going to explain why they are set up that way and why they do make sense for people with a lot of money. Okay, so we're going to start down at the very bottom, not with a trust, not with a holding company, but the very starting point for all of this, which would be an LLC, also known as a limited liability company. Now, if you start a business for any reason, it's probably a limited liability company. It is the most common and simplest type of business to form, and it's also the most effective structure in this particular example. So an LLC can be a lot of things. It can be an ice cream shop. It can be investments. It can be land or real estate. It can even be a vehicle. And by wrapping all of these things in an LLC, your liability for a lawsuit or for your business going under is ultimately limited only to your investment in that vehicle. So they can't go after all of your personal assets outside of the business. Without the LLC, your life savings and everything that you own could be liability for the debts and the obligations of that business. So each of your LLCs does act independently. That's really important to understand. So they have their own profits and losses and ledgers and accounting. They work independently. And while your liability is generally limited, it is possible for attorneys to pierce that. So if you are sued for some egregious debt, or if you do something really negligible with the business, attorneys will try to go after everything you own. And that's where you see a lot of business owners, as they get more and more businesses and assets, they do more and more to protect them. So this is where a holding company comes in. In its purest form, a holding company doesn't really do anything. It's just a vessel for owning and bundling all of these other companies underneath it. Now, these other companies at this point are called subsidiaries. They function under one umbrella, and that umbrella will protect your companies from each other. It also allows you to share profits and losses between the businesses because, again, now they're bundled under one holding company. And that can be really important. Business owners understand the benefits of saying, hey, I've got one bad business that's performing poorly this year. I'm going to go pull from another coffer and leverage my profits and losses in that year. So that really is a big deal for a holding company. Now, one of the most popular and most famous companies out there is Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett, if you think about it, doesn't own a corner store. You can't go into a Berkshire Hathaway next to an Apple store, and there aren't any services out there that you can buy from Berkshire Hathaway. But what they do have is huge ownership in stocks such as Apple and Coca-Cola and Bank of America, just to name a few. Now, keep in mind that a holding company does not have to own 100% of its subsidiaries, just your portion of that asset. So if you have an LLC that you share with a partner, your portion of the LLC could be in your holding company. Now, family holding companies are something else that you hear a lot about, and they slightly differ, but they follow the same general concepts. Walton Enterprises is the example I'd use for the most famous family holding company, and it is the holding company of Sam Walton and the 6 heirs of the Walton family fortune, also known as Walmart. Now, Interestingly enough, it is primarily an investment LLC. So it holds the family stock, and each year, are you ready for this? It distributes a staggering $2 billion just in dividends to the family members. So those dividends are in the holding company, and then they're dispersed to the family members as annual income. So those are some examples of really famous holding companies. But you can imagine, of course, a holding company can get pretty complex and expensive to run. It now has total authority over all of those LLCs and other businesses you own. It has an entirely new level of administration to staff for. Think of it as your headquarters. Now, every decision has to be run and approved by your headquarters. So now you have a holding company, but you have more expenses and some problems to solve. Number one, you need to find a way to reduce your expenses and taxes. And number two, you need some more privacy. Of course, as the number of businesses grow, the goal is that lawyers won't find you when they need to try and sue you or come after you. So how do you reduce expenses? How do you kill your taxes? And how do you gain privacy? Really easy. You incorporate somewhere that doesn't have a public register of shareholders and somewhere that doesn't charge corporate taxes. Now you're starting to understand why something like the islands, which don't do any of the above, become really popular for landing your holding company there rather in the States. And other places, of course, around the globe do this as well. It's why you hear about bank accounts in Switzerland and other places. There are ways to do this within the US. Wyoming is an example that allows for anonymous filing, though people will say there's still ways to find out, but most of us aren't going to go to Bermuda and set up our accounts. So now we're going to add another layer on top of this, the irrevocable trust. If you're looking for a quick breakdown on trusts, I encourage you to go down in the description in my video. There's another video that I did that goes over all the different types of trusts, including both a revocable and an irrevocable trust. Now, a revocable trust is pretty straightforward. It's also known as a living trust. And while a revocable trust is common and something I advocate is fundamental in everyone's financial plan, an irrevocable trust is a whole nother level. Now, you put all of your assets inside of that trust, your house, your bank account, your cars, your investments, and then you completely relinquish control to another trustee. And then for the rest of your life, you ask that trustee for money or for assets when you need them. Now you can look at a creditor and say, hey, I don't own anything. Is this starting to sound familiar? So, in essence, you can't be sued or taxed for things you don't own. An irrevocable trust, however, is primarily designed to transfer assets estate tax-free. It wasn't designed necessarily for creditor protection. And I would argue that that shouldn't be the primary driver for creating such a complex structure. This is also one of the secrets why so many on social media are pushing this strategy. So again, attorneys make a ton of money when you set up all of these structures. And secondly, when you create these businesses, people will say that you can secure debt or business loans. You set up an LLC, you get an EIN or a tax ID number, you go to the bank, you secure these small business loans, and then you leverage them to go start up your next business or to invest in something, and you lose your money. And they say, great, I've got a holding company, it's going to make them hard to find me, and then I've got this irrevocable trust, and I don't own anything. But in reality, a court is going to see all of this as abuse of a trust and tax evasion. So I definitely don't recommend it. There's nothing worse than spending a fortune to get all this set up and then realize that it was smokescreen and the courts are going to look right through it. So let's say, however, your LLCs are valid and you're still with me and you like this setup. Now, it is possible that you can function the first two levels with a revocable trust. As I mentioned, an irrevocable trust is designed to avoid estate taxes. That's the kicker of whether you would want to bring one of those into play. Now, what are estate taxes? Uncle Sam and the IRS want money when you die. It's really designed for wealthy families to get taxed. So they do have exemptions that prevent the everyday person from getting wrapped up in that. Currently, federal estate tax exemptions are just under $13 million for an individual and just under $26 million for a couple. If you are under that $26 million mark and you and your partner don't think you're going to get there, then I would highly encourage you to not get sold into an irrevocable trust just for something like creditor protection. Again, you're handing away all of your assets to someone else. And undoing those, although they will say it's possible, and I know they do it, you're going to pay an attorney a fortune to do that. There are only a few other reasons that an irrevocable trust makes sense if you need to get assets out of your hands. If you're under all of those limits, consider a revocable trust. It doesn't have the credit or asset protection that irrevocable trusts have, but it does do a ton of amazing things such as avoiding probate and allowing you to control all these assets at your death. So after your death, your trust can continue operating and assets or income can be distributed in any way that you laid out in those documents. Consider that maybe you don't want your kids to inherit the businesses until they're 35 years old, or maybe you want to stipulate that they have to work in the businesses in order to inherit them. Really, the world is your oyster when you're creating a revocable trust and designing how you want things laid out. And the coolest part of it all is that you control it completely until you die. Think of it as an upgraded replacement to your will. You stay in control of everything. And if you're over the estate tax limits, an irrevocable trust might be in your wheelhouse. And I'm going to give this strategy a thumbs up if that's the case for you. But again, you can see that asset protection trusts are irrevocable and must be irrevocable by nature in order to say, I don't have anything and I can't control those assets, they're not mine. Anything you control, a creditor can claim. If you remember anything from this video, that would be the one thing. That's how they get it out of your hands, is that I don't actually own it. And all of these strategies require an attorney and some serious professional help to draft effectively. In other words, there are a lot of attorneys out there online encouraging all of these setups, and it's not a bad thing. Just remember that no one cares about your money as much as you do. So consider all of your options. And also just ask for help. If you're interested in a coaching call or leveraging up your financial knowledge, that's what I do. I don't make any money off of selling these products. I provide knowledge and material so that you can learn how to do this on your own from someone who isn't earning commissions. Ultimately, my goal is to help you stay in control, stay educated, and stay curious.